So let's see. And Matt, you can see the screen. We're full screen. Good. Okay, awesome. All right, we're about 3 minutes in. So hello, everybody. Welcome to 2021. This is our first lab of the year. Again, we do these pretty much at the end of every month, the last Thursday of every month. Today's special guest is Matt Burris is Deputy City Manager from Rancho Cucamonga, California. And we're going to focus on the work that we did there and how Matt's applied it in his community through a general plan update and basically a comprehensive plan. And before we get into that, just as a rule of thumb, anybody has any questions, type them in the questions comment chat section. And my colleague, Kate Ryba, will be collecting those. Kate will pop back in at the end and field those questions with us in the Q&A aspect of that. So she can handle that. Also mute your microphone and your video if that hasn't been done already, and put your view to speaker view, and you'll see who's actually talking along the way. So it'll minimize the amount of real estate that gets taken up by the talking heads. So with that, let's launch into background about Matt Burris. He's the Deputy City Manager of Rancho Cucamonga, and trained as a city planner, worked in the private consulting as well as government. So he's seen both sides and also how to apply the work. But as I mentioned earlier, a note of what's going on right now nationally. The single most important thing that I can think of that's happened or happening is there's some really unbelievably boring standards and information that are out there that have an incredible impact. And the biggest one is GADSP. I don't know if you all know GADSP, but GADSP is the Government Accounting Standards Board. And so it's this group that was created in 1984, and they create the accounting standards that all cities use. So if you've ever seen one of my presentations where I talk about the fact that asphalt is listed as an asset in the CAFR standards, well, that's because of the general accounting, or the generally accepted accounting principles that GATSB releases. So they basically say to governments, your roads are assets. Now in my business, my computer's an asset. If I had delivery vehicles or if I had real estate, those are all assets. I can sell the building, the truck, and the computer. You can't pick up your roads and sell them to the next community over. So when you do your books, on the right in red is what the true liability is for all the roads. And this is Lafayette, Louisiana. In blue is the money that they actually have. So they're essentially, the cities are operating on a cash basis, like a restaurant. How much cash do we have in the drawer today, rather than how much debt are we carrying into the future. So it's kind of invisible. They don't see that it's 18 times the load of their revenue. And what's crazy is if you look at what they're paying in debt service or what they owe to the banks or the bonds or whatever, that's the dark blue on the top. So actually that goes away before it even shows up. So when you look at the money, with the way that the city sees the money is they only see that little red square, and they're like, oh, it doesn't look that bad, because they can't see the stuff that's covered up by the future, because you're only looking in a limited window. So if you want to get your screen capture out, that's the website of truthinaccounting.org. That's got a comment cycle. They've got all of the deadlines and everything. I would highly recommend it. If you want to get nerdy, this is like the best place to see it. And Truth in Accounting has done an amazing job at breaking that all down. And they'll be starting an advocacy campaign. They have a form letter that you could look at. They have bullet points. We've raised this issue with strong towns, and you'll probably hear more from us on this, as well as Chuck, because it is that important. I think this comment period is over the next couple of months that they're going to be looking at this. So basically, it's just a matter of standards that have made cities do this. So we've all marched off this fiscal cliff because we have blinders on. So just be aware of that. So, okay, on that depressing note, let's turn it over to Matt. I'm going to go through a brief description of the project that we did in Rancho Cucamonga, and it gets to a question that we hear a lot, which is how do you use this type of analytics in a comprehensive plan for visualizations. So first I'm going to locate where Matt is. He's in the Inland Empire, which is the east end of the Los Angeles metro area. Rancho Cucamonga is on Route 66. It's at the tip of the Inland Empire as it goes toward Los Angeles. It's about 35 miles away from the core of Los Angeles. So there's this large kind of suburban carpet that kind of extends out of the Los Angeles metrosphere, but it's a lot of cities really. And so here's Rancho, just north of the Ontario airport. If you all know where that is, east of Los Angeles. And we're going to talk a lot about the Inland Empire because of its terraform, like the size of what it is at a regional level. So it extends into San Bernardino County, and San Bernardino County is massive. It's the size of Maine in land area. Most of it is desert, but there's a tip of it that's urbanized. That's basically the extension of the Los Angeles. That's kind of got a finger that goes out. It also goes, Los Angeles goes south, east, and south from there as well. But basically Rancho is just west of Redlands and right about there. And one of the things that, this is a couple of diagrams, is we were doing the analysis, Josh McCarty was basically making the comment that we've done a lot of work in the Inland Empire. And he's like, if you think about it, this is 4.6 million people in 27,000 square miles. That is literally the size of South Carolina. Do we talk about this place like a state? Because it basically is a state. Now, the thing about South Carolina is, you've heard of Charleston, you've heard of Greenville, you've heard of Columbia. So inside the Inland Empire, you have all these cities that no one's really kind of stepped up as far as vying to be the Charleston of Inland Empire. They're all competing against each other, but who's stepping up to be the prime to take it to the next level? So that's the attitude that we saw with Rancho Cucamonga, which is this: what's next? How do we modify this? What's our future? And to run through their analytics real quickly, we're just going to cleave off a little piece of San Bernardino, which is basically the urbanized area, and Rancho is that yellow area right there. This is the total value of how things operate. There's a lot of incredibly large real estate parcels here. There's a history of warehousing, distribution, factories, very big properties that are very valuable, but per acre, not so much. And when you look at the 3D of this whole thing, it's pretty flat. And you can see a little bump that pops up for Redlands, but that's basically it. Now, one of the things that in California with Prop 13, you can see the east side of the model is hotter than the northwest side. Well, that's due to the fact of the term of which people have owned real estate, particularly in the northwest corner. Those are older properties, so they hold their value down more than the newer development that happens, let's say, to the east of that grayish square that's at the top there. Newer development comes on the market hotter, but still it's all level because it's all predominantly residential or strip type development. Taxable, non-taxable, the city's about 37% non-taxable, which is about average. But they have areas of focus where they're looking at from downtown growth. One is called Victoria Gardens, which is about 13% non-taxable, which is, it's about, I'd say average for a city that's not a county seat. When you glue on the other areas of the Inland Empire of Riverside, you can still see that kind of all looks the same, but for places that are older, like Riverside, popping up. But there are some lessons down at Temecula and Riverside that can be, again, applied. So looking at this area regionally, how is this growing? Who is going to be the next Charleston, let's say? So back to Rancho, as far as an area of this sliver, it's about 9% of the footprint. It's about 15% of the value. That's a 1-to-2 ratio of productivity. The key factor is maybe looking at the city and seeing that the Victoria Gardens area is about 2% of the footprint. It's about 1% of the value. That's less than a 1-to-1 ratio of productivity. This is actually very low. And we'll come back to the reason why in just a second, but this was the key indicator that popped out for us as they go forward, what they need to get to as far as a healthy downtown valuation. And I mean, you can see it in the model. You can see it when you look sideways at the model. it's just relatively flat. And this is the area that their downtown is in. And it's pulling about, let's call it 5 million an acre of value. Just since I have these models in the can, I just went ahead and showed them to you. This is their property tax model done by districts, and you can see how flat that is relatively. And in California, retail taxes are very important at a municipal level. So, and you can see them popping up. So there's a lot of transactions that are happening in concentrated areas, but nothing as far as like a true bump that you would see in a downtown environment. So there's still a lot of transactions though, however, so that's pretty good. And here they are stacked on top of each other. So, you know, the truth in the data is that if you have retail transactions in a Walmart, well, that's a good thing if you need those retail transactions in to run your municipality. So that helps in the case of Rancho Cucamonga, but it's a matter of how much land you're sacrificing for that to be aware of it. So that's just more of how we do those models. Now back to the benchmarks. When you look at Rancho Cucamonga from a total valuation, population, square miles, the average value per acre, and then their peak, their top of their model, what their tallest spike is about 9 million an acre. And we sampled them against their peers inside the same county. And you can see that Redlands is, you know, half or third of the population. Yet they're having a peak value so much higher. You can see it just with your eyes in the model. You can see how they have a tight purple mountain, if you will, in their downtown, and then they flatten out real quick because they have actually less real estate value than Rancho. So Rancho is doing really well from a housing standpoint and the value of their base level of housing. And you can see that in the average value of the whole city at 1.6 million versus Redlands at 700,000. Yet Rancho is missing an opportunity with focusing on growing up a downtown. Ontario and Uplands is pretty much in the same spot that Rancho's in from a development pattern standpoint. But Redlands has an older downtown. If you go down into Riverside County, again, you look at Riverside, you can see it's downtown, that purple little mountain there. And also Temecula. And Temecula is interesting because it's 116,000 people, but they're achieving 28 million is a peak value versus Rancho at 9. Stepping away from the local examples and just, we have all of these sitting around in our files now, but Santa Rosa, which is up near San Francisco, that's about the same population at 177,000, and so is Eugene, Oregon. Santa Rosa is probably a more appropriate sample, even though it's a different year, but it's still California. But look at the peak value at 28 million and the average value at 1.8 million. And it's equidistant away from San Francisco that Rancho is from Los Angeles. So this is a good peer sample. You can see it physically in the model. You can see that purple mountain that they have. And then it's also got these other regional locational similarities as well. So we thought that was a good comp. And also just looking at their model and seeing Rancho versus Redlands, and then looking at the profile that here's Redlands that pops up, here's Rancho that's kind of flat at 9 million. So can you see yourself as a mountain profile? And then what kind of profile should you aim for? What kind of mountain could you achieve? And we estimated it at about 50 million. It's just, that would be reasonable of a goal to shoot for. Kind of like it's reasonable for me to lose 20 pounds at the end of this year. Like I should have a goal to shoot for, but there's a lot of smaller moves that I have to take to get there. I have to change my behavior. I have to change my diet. I have to change my exercise pattern. So just for kind of for fun, we just happen to be, here's the Inland Empire. This is 3 million people in this model. This is it compared to Minneapolis, St. Paul. So here you have the Minneapolis, St. Paul metro that's 1.8 million, which is less than 3 million. So this is an area that's bigger than the Minneapolis, St. Paul metro area. But look at what Minneapolis and St. Paul has been able to achieve. You can see two downtowns. You can see downtown Minneapolis. You see downtown St. Paul. You could even see downtown Wayzata, which is this little town over on the lake on the western part of the Hennepin County. But why didn't they achieve that here? So we just went ahead and dropped Minneapolis in. Instead, you could have made it downtown Minneapolis. So there it is, floating next to the model. This was the opportunity that they chose to miss by a pattern that they accepted as a fait accompli for the last 50 years. They just allowed the market to just build whatever it wanted. Well, it's going to build the lowest value product because that's simple economics. It just didn't have the history of a Minneapolis. Now, this is kind of a little bit of an obscene example to show them, but it's it's a truth. You know, this could have happened. That's all of downtown Minneapolis right there at the same scale as Rancho Cucamonga. And you can see the difference in pattern of the block structure, tiny blocks in downtown versus the big kind of areas of Rancho Cucamonga. So there's a lot of things you have to do to get to that level of economics, but there's a lot of reward in growing there as well, that you can get 40% of the whole value of the city on 4% of the land. That's pretty impressive. So that was something we just, you know, why don't you try to shoot that? So if you look at the downtown as a benchmark, back to that first point where I said that it's a 1-to-1 ratio of footprint to value, or less than 1-to-1. The reason why we think that's important is that when we look at other cities, this is a little town called Brevard that's like 7,000 people or 8,000 people. And you can see its area to value ratio is a 1-to-7. Asheville is a 1-to-6. Durham or Chapel Hill, it's a 1-to-9, 1-to-4. So you should be way over 1-to-1. You know, and our rule of thumb is you should at least shoot for 1-to-5. 1-to-6. 1-to-6 is kind of an average that we see. So this is who you are. Your downtown's about 400 million. You really should be a $4 billion downtown for a population your size right now, had you grown up a downtown commensurately with your suburban environment. So you need to have multiple real estate types, a diversity of real estate, and you should have had a downtown like this. So this was our marching orders, like, why don't you shoot for that? And then they went into a land planning process to grow this. And we weren't part of that process. Matt's going to talk about that. This was mostly us just offering a diagnostic. And they went through that process by basically grabbing pieces out of that model and using those ingredients that they would find in their own community to say, could we reapply these in a more concentrated urban pattern? Can we use these to build up a downtown as a goal? And this is basically what they created. So there was this huge change in value. Once they picked out where they wanted things to go, we just basically readjusted the model to show the bump. And now you can see what Rancho could have in its downtown is a future value. You can see that Purple Mountain popping up much more potently than Redlands to the east. So this was a visual way of showing them what losing that 20 pounds looks like. So this is where they could go. So here's where they were, or where they are. So the scenario sites that they focused on are currently pulling a value of let's call it 2 million. But by just adding water, just by adding newer buildings and focusing on that goal, they could harvest 8.4 million out of those same sites. So that's a 455% increase in valuation on those properties by focusing on a plan that would cultivate that species to grow. So you need to have that habitat of the urban environment, the walkability, the sidewalks, the streets, the parking, all that stuff that focuses on how that stuff operates. You have to grow it essentially. But by affecting 12% of their property area of their entire city, they're growing $2.1 billion of value. So that's the net effect of their planning process. That's how they use this tool. And now I'm going to just go ahead and I'm going to turn my screen off and flip it over to Matt. And he's going to take it from here to explain the process of what worked and how it worked.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate that introduction. Let me see if I can find my screen and make it all work. All right. You see a big Plan RC screen?
Yep.
Cool. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a blast working with the Urban 3 team. And I'm going to have a little duplication here, just for some history. But I'll jump in and start a little bit with who Rancho Cucamonga is and how we got to where we are. We incorporated about just a little over 40 years ago. 3 cities came together. They were, or 3 communities came together that were in unincorporated San Bernardino County and starting to experience a lot of overflow growth from Los Angeles and Orange counties. Essentially, people were doing what people do, right? This is how we drive sprawl. People were moving to get to qualify or drive until you qualify. That started probably 50 years ago in Western San Bernardino County. So there were 3 little communities in Western San Bernardino County that were experiencing a lot of unchecked growth that was happening through the San Bernardino County land use process, and a lot of the growth control or growth mitigation measures that you might see with a city were being ignored or overlooked as things were entitled through San Bernardino County. So these three communities came together, wanted to make sure that they grew in an intentional way that maintained a certain quality of life, incorporated as one community, and that began our journey. We started as a farming community 100 years ago. We used to be one of the biggest grape growers in the world. Cucamonga Valley was the biggest Zinfandel growing area during the Prohibition in the entire world. And we were producing all kinds of wine for churches and probably other nefarious things outside of churches. We also had a giant citrus industry here in Western San Bernardino County. So we grew up a couple of communities around the Pacific Electric Red Line and some rail lines with packing houses and little town centers. We started suburbanizing, and as we incorporated, we were lucky enough to have a handful of folks with some vision take office. And as such, the city has had a really long history of fiscal stewardship. It's just our mindset, our perspective. This idea that we want to maintain our quality of life, we want to maintain value, we want to make sure that we're not living beyond our means. We want to make sure that we're able to provide a really good quality of life for our residents. And this idea of a sustainable fiscal situation is deeply embedded in our organizational culture. And that's in part what led us to bring Urban 3 on to help us understand what we could and couldn't do. As the city has been moving forward, there have been another number of initiatives that we've taken up that have caused us to take another look at the suburban model that we grew up around. In part, we have a few historic town centers that function a little differently, have a little different character. They're extraordinarily small, maybe 1 or 2 blocks in each direction. But this, coupled with the fact that we incorporated after 1977, after the passage of Prop 13, and we're a low property tax city, really got us to think differently about maintaining our books. We just do not have the level of revenue that a lot of the cities around us who incorporated before us that they do. So we just have long had to have been very responsible in how we think about our fiscal situation. Just to give you guys a little sample of who we are, proving that we're a suburban city. We're nestled right up against the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains, some really incredible front country there that frames the LA basin with the San Bernardino Mountains, some of the tallest mountains in the region are right there in our backyard, 10,000 feet. And as you can see in these pictures taken from around the city, we have little tidbits of historic stuff, but for the most part, having grown up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early aughts, we're primarily an auto-oriented suburban city. When the city incorporated, the city founders decided that these 3 cities needed to have a place to come together as one. And they purchased a bunch of property on the east side of the city that Joe mentioned that we called Victoria Gardens, with the vision of creating a downtown for all 3 communities. They sat on that land for probably a good 20 years, fending off offers from different developers who wanted to buy the land and build more single-family residential, or do the standard regional indoor shopping mall. The city's leaders had this idea that we needed to have a downtown. It took them several decades, and they finally found a development partner through Forest City and a local regional developer called Lewis Operating Group that came together and was willing to give it a try and build a traditional pattern town center that ultimately ended up programmatically as a mall. Joe showed you how this performs for us. It really is the center of our city in a lot of different ways. You can also see that as this area was master planned for a bigger traditional town center or downtown, it hasn't gotten anywhere close to building out, and it's run by ringed by a lot of different parking lots, and that really drives down its value. The property also has a master plan in place and entitlements and all kinds of other fun stuff to allow it to go multi-story, much more dense, parking structures, mixed use and all that. But we haven't quite arrived there yet. So shortly after the city got this project completed, we got our little downtown up and running. And we started to see the increase in revenue. We started to get a taste for what good development could bring to us on the revenue side. We hit the Great Recession, and a couple years after that, Governor Brown got rid of California's redevelopment agency opportunities, and that eliminated tax increment financing. And we really took a hard hit because of that. The city had to write the state of California a $100 million check from our redevelopment agency. Most of the city somehow was in a redevelopment agency, and all that tax increment financing over 30 or 40 years of growth from vineyards and citrus groves into a full-fledged suburban city built up really good reserves. We were able to do a lot of great improvements to help make more of the city developable, dealing with flood issues and such, being real close to the mountains. But we had to give all that money back, and it really hurt our fiscal position because we lost this very substantial revenue stream. And again, we found ourselves in this situation where we just really didn't have the amount of revenue that we needed in order to deliver on the quality of life, types of services, the level of services that our community so desired. So right around that same time, with some changes in leadership in the city, the vision for the future of the city began to evolve. We saw what we could get with Victoria Gardens. We initiated a healthy communities effort where we started looking at some health discrepancies in the city where health outcomes were substantially different in certain communities. Started diving into those questions, trying to figure out what was going wrong. We started to converge in a couple of ideas that essentially the suburban model wasn't as good for us as perhaps we thought. I'm sure that's a big surprise for many of you that are on the call today, that maybe suburbia doesn't deliver on all of its promises. So on the one hand, we had a city that was mostly built around the automobile. And on the other hand, we had a couple of test projects where we were learning that we could do things differently and have more productive land in the city, and learning that we had health issues that were beginning to arise because of the development pattern that most of the city had grown up around. So with that in mind, the city started really pushing to go towards a more productive use of our land, especially in the context of fiscal outcomes. And we updated our general plan, put a mixed use component or a mixed use designation in the general plan, and we really started to push hard for some higher density mixed use projects that made better use of the land. And again, a big part of this was that we knew that our previous paradigm of development wasn't as productive. We were running out of land, and we really needed to improve our fiscal situation. At the same time, we had the Regional Transportation Agency completing some transportation plans, looking at some higher quality transit investments throughout our community. We wanted to capitalize on those investments. And we also made the health connection, realizing that if we built the city out in a different pattern, we would be able to perhaps realize some new health outcomes. And Joe mentioned or showed a diagram with one of our purple spikes kind of towards the west end of the town. So several years ago, we got this new mixed use project, if you will. It's primarily residential with several thousand square feet of retail frontages or shops on the bottom floor. You can see right there, corner of it. And it was really our first urban vertical mixed use building in the city outside of Victoria Gardens, a little less than 5 acres. Its initial value per acre was about $6 million, and tax value coming in around $28 million. And this was a real punch in the gut for a lot of folks in our community because it was so different. You know, it was up close to the street. It wasn't framed by a parking lot, and nobody understood where the parking was going to go. Has a more modern architecture after 40 plus years of building everything with kind of mission winery flavor to it. And people really struggled to understand what in the heck the city was doing. But here in City Hall, we recognize that this type of project really had a lot of potential for improving our value per acre. And it was something that we were really interested in continuing. And again, that's what brought us to bring in Urban 3 as we started our general plan update. Joe mentioned Victoria Gardens. You can see there's a little bit of a bump there on the east side of the city, showing our value per acre. And as Joe mentioned, the city is really rather flat on the value per acre basis. And you can see this reflects several decades of fiscal policy here in the city, where the community development department was looking at every new project that came in as something that had to hit a minimum value, if you will. It had to be high quality. It had to be better than anything else that would be in any of the other surrounding cities. But there really wasn't thought to thinking about or given to how efficient each of these projects might be. It was really just about, okay, we know there's a market for suburban development. We know that's largely what people want. We'll let people build it, but we're going to make sure that it's a higher quality suburban development than anybody else has seen. Here, the building I mentioned to you, Ratie, you can see last spring, right as the pandemic started, a transaction completed where that was sold for $68 million and at a little over 4 acres. It ends up being $15 million per acre. This little purple spike that just shoots up and shows just the potency that can come with really good urban development, even in a suburban context. So we brought Urban 3 in to help us add the fiscal lens, if you will, and improve our vocabulary with regard to fiscal performance in the city. We, having had this long history of fiscal resiliency or fiscal sustainability in mind, and having a long-held value set or culture of really thinking critically about the way we're growing the city and the way each incremental private investment in the city helps our overall basis, is something that we were really interested in evolving here in the city, but we didn't exactly know how. We knew we needed to update our general plan. We knew this was a big issue that we were going to need to address. If the rest of the remaining parts of the city were to build out in kind of the previous suburban paradigm, we knew we would be in a much worse position, because a lot of the suburban development that we've got here in the city just barely pays for itself. And so as each additional chunk of city has been developing, it's essentially been putting us in a situation just kind of treading water. So we engaged Urban 3 to model the city, help us to better understand where we were at and where we might be going, and really to help us tell the story of why a different development pattern might be good in that fiscal context. And we started up our general plan update right around the same time the whole world started shutting down last spring, which was a real twist. Turns out it was a blessing in disguise. It totally changed the way we engaged with the community. And we found that the level of engagement that we received from the community was much more substantial. While I'm a planner, I've been a planner for 20-ish years, and I love a room of 100 crazy citizens more than anybody. And I really miss not being able to get together with the community. We found that the content that we received from the community was much more moderated. It wasn't influenced by folks that were grabbing the microphone and soapboxing. We also found that we had a lot of ongoing discussion between community members. So all of our engagement has been virtual at this point, and it's been fairly small scale, spread out amongst times throughout the city. And we find that people are much more comfortable talking about what they desire for the future of their city when they're in the comfort or safety of their own living room looking at a screen. In a lot of ways, it's counterintuitive to me that people would be more comfortable sharing when they're home, but maybe that's the extrovert in me. I'm not sure. A lot of the feedback that we've received from community has been about moving towards maybe what ultimately, as a planner, I would describe as a less suburban environment and a more urban environment. We continually heard from people that they really wanted more places to go, more ways of getting there, and more things to do when they get there. Joe and I were discussing one of the things that we've also been really surprised at in the kind of feedback we've received is that people from all walks of life and all corners of town have been asking for additional transportation options, that there's a strong interest in not necessarily giving up their car, but having more options. That really is exciting for us. Also hearing that people really desire a more interesting destination, and you can see here in the middle of the screen a direct quote from one of our community members that reflects a lot of input, that people wish that there was a real downtown. So it's been really interesting to us to hear that people don't necessarily see Victoria Gardens as a real downtown. You know, programmatically it's a mall. Physically, it really does function like a small downtown. Across the board, we've heard from people that they really want different types of environments. They really want places to go. And maybe this is in part accelerated by being cooped up at home for several months with the shutdown, where people have found that a lot of their entertainment really was just, and exercise and recreation was just getting out of their house and walking around and biking through the city, and realizing that big streets and being separated in large tracts of housing from places to go is deleterious to their overall quality of life. So where we're going, you can see in Joe's model, is really towards more intense mixed-use activity centers in small areas of the city, putting a greater focus on some of the transportation investments that are planned for the city, and trying to create a greater variety of places for people to go, greater variety of housing types for people, giving people greater opportunity to stay in the city as they're going through different life stages. And excuse me, I've got a new puppy in the background. This is part of the Zoom life, I suppose, in the pandemic, and she's squeaking away. I hope it's not distracting. Ultimately, where we're at in the land use plan is we've devised a land use and community design framework that we share with our policymakers in our community that really focus on, in a lot of ways, accepting that the suburban neighborhoods throughout the city are what they are. Probably 70% of the city is suburban neighborhood, but that we have a lot of key opportunities on a couple of our corridors and at different centers where we have existing or planned transit improvements to help change our future, help give us a more productive overall community fiscally, as well as on the health and sustainability fronts. And this message has been extraordinarily powerful in communicating with our stakeholders. Chamber of Commerce, our business groups really key into this quickly. They like it, they understand it. I think a lot of them are surprised that the city's founders or leaders may be thinking about managing our city more as a real estate portfolio than just thinking about the services we provide. On the community and resident front, people quickly realize that if we improve our overall basis, and especially if we do it in a more productive manner, increasing the yield of several of the focus areas in the city, it allows us to maintain the level of services that we're providing, or maybe even more so, it gives us an opportunity for enhancing services that we might offer to our community. And so this has been extraordinarily powerful in communicating the general plan update. A couple of our council members right now are regularly ask us when we bring new development questions to them, new real estate opportunities. They say, well, how does this fit with the purple spike concept? So somebody's interested in developing a particular piece of land. They say, does it give us a purple spike? Is it going to increase our value per acre? Is it going to increase our value per acre across that threshold that Joe was discussing? You know, is it going to get us over 1 to 4, 1 to 5, 1 to 6? Where is it going to put us? How does it compare with the RTA development? Interestingly, one of the things that has also been really powerful in connecting with the community through the general plan update and helping us to shape the vision component of our comp plan effort is the recognition that we as a region are as big as South Carolina, and there's no capital. People have been stunned by that recognition, and a lot of folks in the community have grabbed onto it and said, well, let's step up. We want to be the capital of the Inland Empire. We're as big as Maine or South Carolina. We have several million people here. We want to be the cultural and economic center of the Inland Empire, and let's go make that happen. So we're about halfway through our comp plan update right now. Our council members have really bought into this concept. Our policymakers on other boards and commissions like our planning commission and our executive team here at the city have really grabbed onto this as well, in part because it's given us the vocabulary and some basic tools to understand how we should be better shaping future development, or even just shaping different questions as we're looking at challenges here in the city. And one of the questions we regularly get from our mayor pro tem is, well, how are you going to put this into action? And we after we got through this initial round of analysis with Joe and his team, we started scratching our heads. We're not exactly sure how to put it into action. And then this summer, we had an opportunity to put it all to at least start playing with this and start thinking about how value per acre might start shaping our decisions. So for some context, the Inland Empire is one of the hottest industrial markets in the whole country. Approximately 40% of all the goods that come into the United States, or maybe it's that come into the West Coast, I'm sorry, I forget, come in through the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, which, as Joe showed you in the map, is only 30 or 35 miles to the west of the Inland Empire. Here in Ranch Cucamonga, we happen to be located at the intersection of Interstate 15 and Interstate 10. So we got a major rail line that's coming from the ports through the city, and we're at this crossroads where the Inland Empire in Southern California connects with all the southern states across the United States through Interstate 10, and the western half of the United States, even up to Canada, through Interstate 15. Because of our location, we're one of the hottest markets, and for industrial development, this industrial market is driving lots and lots of investment in our region. To give you an idea, about a year ago, we had a 60-acre site with a 1 million+ square foot warehouse on it. It was built in 1987, sell for $191 million, with the intent of buying the property, tearing down the warehouse, building a new one, a second smaller one, and leasing it back out. So we're just seeing some, maybe the market's hot enough that we're seeing some fairly irrational behavior on the buying side. But we got some numbers last week, and we found that in the Inland Empire, there was demand for 20 million square feet of industrial development last year, and the region was only able to produce 18 million. So we for many, many years, we've been behind the 8 ball, if you will, and be able to meet the demand for new industrial development. And a lot of it is taking the form of large logistics facilities. There's a huge desire for 1 million square foot buildings. I've heard some statistics that in the Inland Empire, there's only enough room to build maybe another dozen or dozen and a half of such facilities. And then they'll have to move to less ideal locations from a transportation perspective. So what does all this mean? What does it mean for us? And how does it catalyze putting value per acre into practice? Well, last July or August, we got word that the last steel mill in Southern California, it might be in California as a whole, which was located here in Rancho Cucamonga, was going to be closing. And they were going to be closing after finishing a $22 million air quality investment to help keep ahead of the Air Quality Management District's regulations for criteria pollutants. So they made this gigantic investment in a facility that's been here since World War II. And their new owners realized that they could sell the property, take the money from selling the property, and build a whole new facility at their mill in Mesa, Arizona, and still be ahead. They'd still have money left over. And so they put the property up for sale. It really bothered us. I mean, it was a real shock because the loss of that facility represented several $100,000 in lost revenue every year. And this is coming on the heels of the closing of the pandemic, where we had to go through a major budget reduction, laying off several hundred people and cutting lots of projects and services in order just to keep our heads above water. And just kind of one of those, oh gosh, what do we do now? You know, yet another hit. And it took us a couple of weeks, but finally we connected the dots, and we thought, well, okay, it's maybe a 60-acre facility, and yeah, we're going to lose a couple $100,000 a year in revenue because they produce materials and they sell those materials to other businesses, and so we'll lose that sales tax. But maybe it's not that big a deal. Let's go ask ourselves that question. if that site were to redevelop, would it perform any better or any less than the rest of our industrial district? So we took the value per acre framework, looking at our property tax and our sales tax, and applied it across our entire industrial district in the city. And you can see that our industrial district is, for the most part, pretty flat. And we found that the industrial district, it's very it's highly variable, and you can see by a couple of spikes, but for the most part, it's pretty uniform. And you can see from some of the darker tan areas in the city that we have some industrial projects that substantially underperform relative to other areas of the city. Our steel mill is right here in the city. You can see it performs just average. And when we did the math, we found out that, yeah, if the steel mill closes and we just let it develop the way the rest of the industrial district in the city has developed, we'll probably be fine because it performs at just about average. So maybe it's not a big deal. And then we started considering what's happening in the market and what does the market want to bring? We have, I think, 6 million square feet of logistics facilities in our development pipeline right now. And so we thought, well, there's a high likelihood that if that property turns over, it's a giant piece of property, somebody's going to come in and want to put at least 1 million square foot building on that property. And so we started trying to unpack this. Well, what does it look like on a value per acre for our various zoning districts that comprise our industrial area? What might we be looking at? And we found that depending on what industrial district it is, it could be very productive or really not productive. So our general industrial district and our industrial park districts are very productive relative to our heavy industrial and our minimum and impact districts, which surprised us a little, especially considering that the steel mill is in the heavy industrial district. And we thought, well, hey, it's a big sales tax generator, and we're going to lose a couple $100,000 a year in revenue off that. So then we also started looking at what it might mean on other economic indicators beyond just value per acre. Do we get more businesses out of it? Are there differences in the size of parcel that we might find? Are there any reasons why we might want to shift the direction the market will want this to go? Is there anything we might want to do to look at this differently? And we found that throughout the city, the smaller the parcel in our industrial district, the higher the productivity. You can see the little dot graph here, that as the parcels get smaller, they become substantially more productive for us. And part of that is because they attract different businesses. This doesn't include a component in here where there's a jobs factor in this analysis. But just on a value per acre basis, we're finding that they generate much more revenue for the city, the smaller the parcel. And then we also are finding that the smaller the parcel, the more businesses we get per acre. This analysis, this framework has been extraordinarily valuable for us. After doing the analysis, we quickly concluded that it was going to be in the city's best interest to hit pause on development of these logistics facilities, especially in the southeast area of the city, because that's where the large tracts of industrial land are left. That's where we're seeing some legacy facilities turning over. And that's where the greatest demand for these facilities is gravitating or occurring. And having these numbers and having them available to help explain to our policymakers why we might want to hit pause, take a look at our standards, take a look at the direction things are going, take a look at how we might be managing these facilities has really helped drive the conversation. It's also helped us conduct conversations with folks who are interested in redeveloping facilities here in the city. We had, for example, we have some areas in the west side of the city where we have legacy manufacturing businesses. And again, the value of land has gotten so high in industrial districts that developers are very interested in buying these facilities, kicking out the old businesses, getting rid of manufacturing and building a logistics facility. And we now have the tools to help explain to them why we are not in favor of such decisions. We're able to tell them that, an existing facility, for example, maybe generates $4,000 or $5,000 per acre, and we don't want their project as proposed because it's going to result in a net decrease in 40, 50, or 60% of our revenue per acre. So we've got a number of challenges that we need to resolve yet, but we're really making some great progress in better understanding how to scope development here in the city using this framework. So I'll stop there. I know that we want to have some time for Q&A.
Yeah, Matt, this is amazing, and your little puppy is a riot. It sounds like a little robot at this end. You've done a good job of getting through all this information with the distraction. I thank you for that.
Sorry for the squeak.
No, it's fine. It's what we're all in these days. This has been an amazing presentation. This whole last section floored me. That I hadn't seen these charts that you did before. One of the things that I noticed that I think the audience needs to hear was kind of shocking to me is you had the city council and the planning commission in the hearings together to get the presentations together. And there seemed to be a level of unanimity in the conversation, and they got it quickly. So what did you all do to kind of fertilize that, or how did that happen?
So for us, part of it is that maybe it's a recognition on our part that having a good fiscal position is an existential problem for us. We are almost out of land. You can see from some of the maps, the city is primarily single family, suburban residential, and it's going to be that way forever. So we have fewer and fewer chances to get this right. And we wanted to make sure that the Planning Commission and the City Council had an opportunity to hear all the same information at the same time and have a conversation about what maybe needed to happen here in the city. So we want to make sure that our City Council had an opportunity to hear from our Planning Commission on what should happen on a land use basis, kind of the technical perspective. We want to make sure that the Planning Commission was able to get us a look at the kind of the fiscal concerns that the council may have. So hoping to bridge their kind of respective concerns and get them all on the same page.
So a question from the chat room from Dennis Strait, who's a developer in Utah. Are there any value capture and recycling strategies that are being discussed or already built into the Victoria Gardens initiative? And he goes on to ask, like, tax revenues from the urban centers often get distributed into the general fund and are not partially reinvested in shoring up as a value capture in that area. So think of it like you all have the CFDs, those districts that you can create. Is there talk about that in the development for Victoria Gardens, or revolving some of that growth back into the project?
We have talked about that. You mentioned CFDs, community facility districts, which are a tool that can easily be misused, but if they're scoped right, really give us an opportunity of bringing new revenue into the city in again, focused ways. So those are conversations that we're having right now. One of the things that's really tough for us as a low property tax city is that even if there's additional value that's coming, that incremental value, if we're not careful, it just gets soaked up in providing existing services really, really quickly.
Actually, I have to make a correction there. It was the wrong Dennis I had, but the Dennis Strait from Gould Evans out of Kansas City, who is a partner of ours in a project in Missouri. Thank you, Dennis. Sorry about that. But so actually, Matt, you mentioned this earlier at the beginning of the conversation. One of the things that not a lot of people outside of California realize is that your state basically just took away your ability to do what we would call business improvement districts, or you all called them redevelopment areas. And it's almost like there was an apology, and it was like, okay, we're going to give you that tool back. But has that come back to you all yet, or how is that manifesting itself?
It's funny, we were talking about that moments before I got on this call today. We're looking into it. It's called an enhanced infrastructure financing district. One of the real challenges behind it is that all the different agencies' participation is voluntary, and several of the agencies that receive property tax are exempt from participating. So consider this, in Rancho Cucamonga is a low property tax city. We get around 5% or 5 cents on a dollar of all the property tax collected. And we don't have a lot to contribute to an EIFD. And the other big districts that might want to participate really end up being like the county and the fire district. There are a couple of other smaller districts, but if nobody else wants to participate, we end up with very little that we can contribute. That 4 to 5 cents per dollar doesn't go far, even with the incremental value in development.
Just another question that's come to mind is, we see that for you all, there's, at your level in city management, you're fully engaged with the planning commissioners and the council. There was a lot of appreciation of the information, a very engaged conversation at those public meetings. I haven't been part of the process to see what happens internally inside your staff. Has this also helped silo busting, if you will, inside the departments? Has this conversation shifted internally in your culture, or is it just mostly externally?
No, it's helped internally as well. We've been working to break down silos for a very long time. So we don't have a lot of the same divisions between, for example, engineering and planning and public works and building and safety that I've seen in some other agencies. A lot of that groundwork was already laid for us. Again, this is giving us some common vocabulary, and it's really helping our internal team communicate expectations to prospective investors in the city. Again, being able to have the tools, the vocabulary, the data to say, hey, this proposal that you've got, it's a great idea, and this is why we might want to support it, or it's a really bad idea for us, and this is why we're not going to support you, or hey, you're so close, and we really need you to do X, Y, and Z for us to get behind it because you're just not quite there, and to give them quantitative feedback on why a project might need to go just a little bit further.
Okay, one last question because we're reaching the 2 o'clock limit here. What zoning changes, if any, have you made to promote the more intense mixed-use development?
We created a whole new mixed-use district several years ago, and adopted that with the intent of driving us towards more urban development. After several years of working to apply it, we're finding that it really doesn't quite get us there. There are a lot of fundamentals that are missing, such as frontages, explicit maybe expectations on how you handle parking, how you connect to the streets. And we're working on updating those components of our code right now. We'll probably end up creating several new districts to give us maybe more specificity in what we expect for the future.
Cool. And just one last quick add to that. I don't know if you've noticed, but I think Berkeley, California, yesterday threw out their entire parking standards for their whole entire city. South Bend, one of our other clients, did the same, I think last month. I think that's going to be the trend, is people just throwing out parking altogether in their zoning code and just seeing what happens. But there might be unintended consequences, but at least we're having these conversations now.
We've tried some of that, Joe. And I think because we don't have enough transit here, we're still most of the city operates as a suburban city. And we're finding 2 things happen. Either one, somebody takes us up on the offer and we do end up having parking issues, or 2, the developer wants to provide way more parking than we want. And we're trying to pull them back saying, no, that's too much pavement, guys. And so we're trying to find some middle ground there as we make this transition.
Well, Matt, I want to thank you and thank everybody, and apologies, Dennis. Sorry about that. But with that, thanks for your time. Our hour is over. Our next lab is on the 25th. Mark your calendars, pass it on to folks. We'll have this recorded and on our YouTube site. It'll maybe by tomorrow, we should have that. So for those that want to have this recording, just come and get it. And if you want to reach out to us about doing a project, please reach out to Kate, my colleague, Kate Ryba, or if you need us for a presentation in your community to kind of explain this stuff or to do these presentations, reach out to our colleague, Caitlin Nellis Masters, and thank you all for your time. And I think the show is over. So thanks, Matt. Enjoy that puppy. Take care.